Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila. You can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
That's right. Got a really seminal moment in the history of this podcast this week.
That's right. Our very first podcast was the week that Rush Limbaugh admitted to America that he does not understand how birth control works.
Right.
He called Sandra Fluke, a college student at the time, a slut.
A slut and a prostitute.
And a prostitute,
I believe.
For needing birth control, because he believed that it seemed to suggest that he believed that you needed more birth control the more sexual encounters you were having. So it wasn't just like, oh, you take a birth control pill every day, and getting birth control is sort of like a lifelong obligation for the length of you wanting to not have babies that you don't want. But that you needed one birth control pill or one birth control thing
right.
per sexual encounter. And he seemed put out that you would want to have so much sex that you would be annoyed when your access to birth control was compromised.
Yeah, that's right.
That is not
and Sandra Fluke, really what she was doing was to try and get insurance companies to cover.
That's right.
To cover
and
birth
he was
control.
Just like, why do they want to pay all this money for all of these women to need all of these pills?
Slut around town.
Around town. Keeping in mind that birth control is used for numerous other health conditions, but also you're either on birth control or you're not. You're not like on 3 days a week of birth control, and if you are having too much sex, you get the fourth or something. Like, it was so alarming to me that a man who has presumably raped women did not understand the basic biology of birth control. And whatever you say about him, whatever Ben Shapiro wants to write about him secretly being a misunderstood genius or whatever bullshit is in the New York Times right now, just remember that this genius is a person who either willfully or ignorantly did not understand a basic thing about a very common medication that is used by 40% of the population. So just know that about your life right now.
Right. This also happened. This was because I was looking up exactly when this was and the details of it, because I couldn't remember exactly how this all went down.
9 years of podcast since then.
Well, we've been 9 years of podcasting, and actually, what I was about to say is almost exactly 9 years of podcasting, because his radio show where he called her that was February. I think it was 29th, because I think it was a leap year. But yeah, so almost we're coming up on exactly 9 years of this podcast now.
And we should note that we're planning to do something fun for our 400th episode.
Yeah.
We're going to do a trivia night. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah.
But also happy 4-year anniversary to us, and 9-year anniversary to us, and happy 9-year anniversary of us no longer ever needing to talk about, or happy us no longer needing to talk about Rush Limbaugh for the next 9 years anniversary. Right. I said it backwards, but you guys understood what I meant.
Yeah, we got it.
Hopefully this is the end of an era on this podcast in which we were forced to discuss stupid shit that Rush Limbaugh was saying.
Right.
Often against our will. We were certainly not listening to his show.
No, exactly.
But moving on to actual news. Also, well, I will say there was a big conversation that broke out online again, like when Roger Ailes died, about whether it's okay to be a jerk about idiots dying. And if you're a complete asshole, people are going to make fun of you after you die. That's, I think, it's a compelling reason not to be a complete asshole if you care about your legacy at all. I just feel like when I die, whether it's a tragic accident, whether it's when I'm 107, whenever it is, what I don't want is everyone to get a chuckle out of it. So I try to live my life like I wouldn't want everyone to make fun of me on my grave.
Yeah,
and Rush Limbaugh is not a man who chose that.
He did not live that way.
No,
it was not his aim.
It was not his goal. It was not his life. That was not his plan.
And in fact, you know what? It was one of those times where obviously I was sort of like, thank God Rush Limbaugh's dead. But also something about Rush Limbaugh, and I don't know, I almost just didn't care. Is that crazy? It was just sort of because a lot of people were shit talking him online, and I was chuckling at that, certainly myself.
Had to do that. Yeah.
But I was also kind of you know what? Just he's a fucking joke. He's a nobody. you know, and like just good riddance. And like now, like you said, I think, you know, it's like, you know, cheers to not having to talk about Rush Limbaugh any longer.
Well, and he's also no longer the epitome of his legacy anymore. Donald Trump is. So
That's true.
it's
Yeah, that's
when
true.
Donald Trump dies, we will feel a way about that
Right.
because that will be like Rush Limbaugh's legacy dying, maybe not in the
Yeah,
popular imagination, but in a very meaningful form.
totally.
And Rush Limbaugh was no longer the keeper of that legacy.
Yeah.
It had moved beyond him.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
in any case,
Yeah, sadly it had moved to the presidency.
it's a really, that was hard to say.
Oh yeah.
Listen, you guys, this was a wild week for news in general, and we almost forgot to mention Rush Limbaugh when we were putting the doc together because we had to talk about what was going on in Texas, and not just what you think is going on in Texas, which is a wild humanitarian crisis that was 100% avoidable, but also
Yeah.
why this humanitarian crisis that was 100% avoidable, A, wasn't avoided, and B, should have been.
Yeah.
Because Texas, you might know, Texas had some cold weather this week. Unseasonably cold,
Right.
unusually cold.
Yes. But you'll also, if you were paying very close attention, you will also know that many other states also did. Oklahoma, equally as cold for
Cold
much
state.
of the week.
Very cold.
Less problems there.
Like the entire middle of the country, regardless of their varying degrees of usual winter weather, had like sub-zero temperatures all week. And listen, that's not great. We live in LA and we know how poorly insulated our houses are. We know how when it gets cold in LA, it is really, I'm often trying to explain to people on the East Coast why weather that seems kind of mild by East Coast standards can feel so extreme in LA. And I'm always like, you guys, I don't have I don't have heat. My house is
That's
not
what I was gonna
actually
say.
insulated.
If it gets below 50 degrees here, then I think that I am
then my
going
house
to
is
die of hypothermia
right.
overnight.
Then my
I
house
mean,
is
I
below 50
won't, but
degrees.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's the cold air is all around me, and that is also why it's a problem when it's too hot in Southern California, even though
Right.
it seems like it always is hot there. Like I get that like Texas is like not, and they don't, you know, I also know based on having been in Washington DC during snowstorms, what happens when you're in a place that doesn't have snow plows and it snows. Washington DC
Totally.
is a city that it snows every year. And yet they have like -3 snow plows in that entire city. And so like 2 inches of snow can cause the entire city to shut down because
Yeah.
there's no way to get the road safe. I
Yeah.
get all of that. But here's another thing about Texas. One, they had a winter storm with rolling outages in 2011 that alerted them to the possibility that they might need to winterize their grid. That was only
Right.
10 years ago. That was in popular memory time. So
Yeah,
the
that's
fact
I think Texas would like us to have, they were really
extensive
liking, they were,
was
all of the people who were decision makers in Texas were really running with the once in a generation storm storyline this week because that, you know, helped their narrative to a degree.
right.
But it's not, and that's not the case. We
The
can
only
all remember when
generation
this last happened.
this has only happened once in is the under 10 generation in Texas.
Right, exactly.
7-year-olds have had a once in a generation experience this week.
Right.
But this was a time, 2011, when there were some questions from the federal government about what Texas was planning to do to prepare for this occasion occurring in the future. We are all well aware that because of climate change, we are expecting extreme weather more frequently. Texas is a place that every once in a while it snows and stuff. And like,
Yeah.
that's crazy, but like life is crazy out there, you guys. Texas took a very Texas approach to this question and thought to themselves, do we want to let these goons in Washington tell us what to do in the great state of Texas? And so what they did was they disconnected themselves from the national power grid and deregulated the energy industry to a degree that is pretty comical at this point because it's so nonsensical.
Yep.
Then decided not to winterize anything because that was going to cost money, and who wants to spend money on infrastructure that could save lives? And
Right.
why would you let the feds tell you what standards you need to meet for, you know, for a electric grid, even though basic public safety is heavily tied to the effectiveness of your grid? And we are well aware that grids all over America are outdated and in need of replacing. And we are already looking at a situation in which the entire Northeast could be wiped out for months if like one foul move is made, not by the weather, but just by like bad luck.
Right. Well,
But
and
Texas was
we
just like, we
found
can
out.
do this on our own.
Yeah, totally. Well, and we found out later in the week, actually, how very close it was to being
Yeah.
fully destructive in a way that could have gone on for weeks and months.
Months.
Yeah,
Texas's power company, well, maybe someone who worked at Texas's power company, admitted later in the week in the Texas Tribune that they were like minutes away from the kind of outage that Puerto Rico experienced after Hurricane
yeah,
Maria, like
right,
months long outages that could not be repaired. And
right.
one way that you overcome that kind of a situation, if you are a regular state, is that you rely on other states' power generation to be diverted to you.
Well, and that's the
That is not
thing,
something
I
you can
think
do if you're Texas.
right. And all of these other states, and that's how they didn't end up in the same situation. Besides the fact that they didn't decide to like completely go it alone, also what you see throughout the country is different sort of like regions in the country sort of like have the states in those regions are all sort of connected to each other. So they're generating power, they're storing power, and then when I think like all of those other states, like Oklahoma and Kansas and Arkansas and some of those other states that got that bad weather through the middle of the country, are all together like in a 13 state power sharing situation. So as soon as it got bad someplace, they had enough stored from all of those 13 states that they could move it to where it needed to go. And because Texas decided to be by themselves, they didn't have that luxury. They just didn't have anything. There was nothing for them to do.
It meant that in places like Oklahoma, there were still a few there were rolling blackouts in some of those states.
Yeah, right.
But their grid was winterized because federal regulations required them to winterize their grid. So they didn't face these kinds of prolonged 5-day outages that we were seeing in Texas, in part because they were power sharing with other states, but also because they were obligated under federal regulation to make sure that their electric grid, which is once again crucial to public safety and health, was winterized just in case weird weather like this, which we are well aware is a possibility, came on down. Now people are suing ERCOT, which is the power utility in Texas that controls about 90% of the state's power generation. But honestly, like I would say, the government tried to foist this onto ERCOT as if this was their responsibility. And this is actually government negligence at work. Private industry
they tried to say that
to save money. That is their entire plan.
Yeah, they tried to say that ERCOT was like not upfront with the government about like how much power that they are, like, how prepared the grids were to handle something like this.
That's ridiculous, when you have neglected to do basic maintenance and upkeep on the grid as the public agency in charge of said situation. And we can blame Rick Perry for a lot of the deregulation that led to this beautiful moment that we experienced last week. Former Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who as the governor of Texas allowed a lot of this deregulation to occur. But also, like, the government is the only body with the imperative to protect the public. Like ERCOT doesn't care about you, and that's not their job. Their job is to provide power and to save money and to make as much money as possible, because they are a private company that has been contracted to do what is essentially public work, and make a profit doing that. If you are going to hire private industries to serve public interest and public needs, then it is you are the body as the government that is responsible for protecting public safety. You're the body that's responsible for not just letting ERCOT tell you that they've done what they need to do, but going and inspecting and setting your own standards to make sure that not only have they done what they needed to do from their, in their opinion, but also that they are not imperiling public safety in an effort to make more money.
Right. But the problem in Texas is that the government actually doesn't care about doing this, like specific, and like to the point where it actually became somewhat shocking this week, because I think that we all knew that the government in Texas didn't give a shit about their citizens, but like we actually had some electeds in Texas specifically declare that they did not give a shit about their constituents. I mean, literally mayors and electeds throughout the state were being like, fucking figure it out, guys, like build a fire. Like it was so like crazy.
Of responsibility, considering that you like pay your mayor's salary. Like your mayor is hired by you to figure this out for you, so that in a crisis like this, you are not without a plan to figure it out. So here's what happened. First of all, they were warned that there might be rolling blackouts, but in the California model, where your power goes off for a few hours and then it comes back on and you're annoyed because you're too hot in California's case, or you're too cold in Texas's case, but you kind of share the burden of limited power resources, because obviously people were really pumping up their heat.
Yep.
And so obviously there was a big burden on the grid. And also because the grid wasn't winterized, they kept having issues actually generating the power that they needed in the first place.
Right.
But instead what happened was Texans went for like 5-day stretches without power or water in the middle of a huge winter storm where travel and the roads were not particularly safe, where nobody has appropriate winter training there. They don't know how to like de-ice their cars in Texas, and why would they?
Right.
Nobody had heat, which it's terrible when the temperature goes down to the 40s in LA and I don't have heat because my house isn't insulated. These were sub-zero temperatures.
Yep.
And obviously these rolling outages were not shared equally, but were in fact targeted to certain neighborhoods more often than others.
No,
Because
that can't be.
why was it that residents of Houston could see their downtown skyline lit up that entire week while they went 5 days without power? It reminded me of a time
Yeah.
that remember where there were those big blackouts on the East Coast, like, in the early 2000s, that like there was one that went on for a few days that knocked out like literally the entire East Coast. And then there was another that I think just knocked out New York. They were like a huge deal. You probably weren't here, so you don't think about them all the time, but I do. And my neighborhood, I grew up in Manhattan, in the center of Manhattan.
Yeah.
And my neighborhood was for some reason the last neighborhood in Manhattan to get power after they started turning power back on. So like that morning, like my friends are calling me like, do you want to go do something? And I was like, we still don't have power. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And then like, you could see Times Square lit up from our roof because they hadn't built all these buildings blocking it yet. So like all around us, we went to our roof and like all around us, there's power. Broadway was open, like, and we're still sitting there on like day 3 of no power. And the feeling of rage that I experienced in that
I'm sure,
was memorable to the extent that I thought of it immediately as soon as I saw this situation in Texas. But like,
right.
that was during a huge heat wave and it was really hot. And so it was really uncomfortable. Our food went bad, like instantly, like it was awful. And I can only imagine if you are sitting in Houston with no running water, the roads are icy, you don't have any winter clothes, your house doesn't have any heat, and you are looking at downtown Houston just like lit up for all to see, and you are going 5 days without power. Like I can't imagine the rage that people must have felt in that situation, because of course rolling blackouts never target neighborhoods equally. Neighborhoods do not equally share the burden of rolling blackouts ever. That's why you kind of want to avoid them.
Yeah, totally.
But this is also, I think, a good example of why you can't let states just set all their own safety standards independently, because whose money is going to bail Texas out right now? Well, and rightfully so. I mean, there's a huge humanitarian crisis going on there now. People literally died by freezing to death there this week.
But for the reasons that we already talked about, where they sort of like, ignored regulations and then also sort of like decided to go it alone and didn't get, like had they made better decisions, then this wouldn't have been the crisis that it would have been. So yes, as you said, it's a humanitarian crisis. We have to go in and help people. It's fucking tragic. People have died and they didn't need to. But, federal regulators should, take up shop in Texas and not leave until this is no longer the case the next time they get a winter storm.
I think it was also outside of Texas, lost on exactly 0 people how Texas politicians routinely dismiss the need for disaster relief in other states after major disasters. Totally. Like Californians were like all up in arms because of things that Ted Cruz had said about California during the fires and during rolling blackouts we've experienced. New Yorkers were not happy to hear about this because of the way that Ted Cruz had spoken about New York after Hurricane Sandy and had opposed disaster relief to Sandy.
Totally.
Texas was like, try experiencing hurricanes. And New Yorkers were like, yeah, that time. Remember that time that we did? And then you didn't want to send disaster relief?
Right.
But I feel like this is an example of why there have to be limits on the public safety freedoms, the public safety rules that states have the freedom to set for themselves. Because Texas is already a welfare state. We already pay more money into Texas than they pay us as a union. And that was something a lot of us learned this year and we're horrified to find, because you think of big states as being the donor states and the small states as being the welfare states, but Texas is a welfare state. And listen, I'm happy to carry everyone along on this ride as long as the actual people in those states are being taken care of, because it matters to me that like regular people have like safe environments and food and
Yes.
healthcare and education.
Not everybody could just get up and leave Texas just because the power grid doesn't
Right.
work.
Like, yeah, I feel like there's always a lot of snark about like, well, why don't you just leave like obviously not everyone can fly to Cancun like Ted Cruz when the power goes out for 5 days in Texas.
Right.
And also it is like regular people that live in Texas who like
Yeah, of
need
course.
food and shelter like everyone else. But if Texas cannot be trusted to act responsibly when they decide to go it alone, they should not be allowed to go it alone. We should not
Totally.
have to pay into their disasters while they tried to save money by not following the rules that are essentially risk prevention related. I mean, the reason the federal
Yeah.
regulators require you to have your grid winterized, require you to take these kinds of precautions is so that we don't have to pay for your stupidity when you have a stupid crisis like this.
Yeah.
I mean,
You know what legislation would fix all of this, Lila? I don't know if you
I
heard.
mean, I think I do.
Oh, do you? Yeah. Green New Deal. You've heard of it?
Well, here's the thing. I've heard that it was to blame somehow for this crisis, despite not having been enacted. I hear that windmills and the Green New Deal. By the way, I love that we've all started calling wind turbines windmills. Like now that Donald Trump did it, we just like I'm windmill for life now. I'm talking about windmills to my heart's content. But this is exactly what the Green New Deal is set up to address. But also, I love that Republican politicians tried to get on TV right after this started happening and blame the Green New Deal for it, as if there is a Green New Deal that
I was gonna say blame what?
Like
What
that's
part
like
of it are they gonna? It's sitting on
blaming
somebody's desk right
ideas.
now collecting dust. It's not.
I mean, like, I just like I love how they tried to scare tactic the Green New Deal and everyone was like, that hasn't happened yet, you idiots.
Right.
But in any
Yeah.
case, the Green New Deal would be helpful here, but also strong federal oversight when states are acting a fool.
right.
I mean, it's like with the Voting Rights Act, which Texas maybe should also be under observation. Because one of the reasons they have such idiotic politicians is because it's incredibly hard to vote in Texas. Texas is not like 90% nightmare people. It is just a place where it is like incredibly hard to vote. It is a state that should be purple that is deep red because of voting regulations that make it impossible for people who actually like need stuff to vote. But in any case, there should be strong federal oversight over Texas's disaster preparedness and other aspects of their infrastructure plan forever that they cannot get rid of and stay in the union. Like this should not be allowed.
Right. Well, and that's what everybody kept, rightfully noting out that, 2 weeks ago they wanted to secede, and then now they need the federal government's help, which, is rich.
But another thing to keep in mind if you are a Texan is that the one group of people that doesn't seem to care about the federal government's help are your own politicians who seem to think that it is okay to leave you to die.
Yeah.
Like there is like your governor is suddenly very interested in federal help, but you have a number of blowhard politicians at the federal level and at the state level who seem to not care that much about the federal help because they wanted you to figure this out for yourself. The whole reason that you live in a society is so you don't have to figure something like this out by yourself. That's what society is literally for. Otherwise, you could just not have society. Like we wouldn't need a government if this kind of thing wasn't the exact reason that we need a government. Like, I don't understand people who are so kind of like wrapped up in like weird libertarian ideology that they don't realize what the like ultimate point of living in a society is, which is mutual aid, basically. That's it. In any case, it sounds like for the most part, the outages are done. ERCOT ended the rolling outages Friday morning. There's still some like ancillary outages because certain providers that are trying to reconnect to the grid. But on February 16th, which was sort of like the height of this, there were 4.6 million people without power, million customers. So that's probably even more people. That's probably like 10 million people without power and heat, the most important part of the power equation, in sub-zero temperatures. And then there was also a big issue with, if you're from a winter state, you might realize that this is a thing, but pipes bursting, as they often do when the pipes freeze, they often burst because, ice is bigger, expands. And so there were huge issues with water in the state because pipes burst all over the state. People's homes were flooded. That was terrible, but also like municipal pipes burst. And so something like half the state was without water during a lot of this. And, obviously it wasn't the most COVID safe situation, but also food banks were shuttered. Supermarkets were picked clean. The food supply chain broke down instantly.
Yep.
People were like burning their furniture for heat and shit like that. And I would also note to keep in mind that if you are a person who is a Texas politician and thinking we couldn't have done anything about this, I would note that there are parts of the country where all winter they have to transport groceries in cold and icy weather. That's literally like 100% of living in Chicago in the winter. And
Yeah.
somehow their food supply chain doesn't break down. So it's not that we expect that Texas would necessarily have the resources to do this, but it does feel like maybe given that this was forecasted and also something that happened 10 years ago, that
Yeah.
they might have an emergency plan that allows them to keep the food supply chain going even in cold and icy weather, since it's not like no human has figured
Well,
out.
that's the thing too. I mean, I think we saw a lot of examples of, there was that photograph that was going around where like, one side of the street had been plowed and one side hadn't because it was along the border of, two states where, one had decided at some point to buy a snow plow because like they felt maybe that
Just in
since
case.
they get snow every once in a while, and the other one like had no way, like we saw a lot of that. And I don't even know if that was Texas, honestly, but like, I think that there is also just sort of like something to be said for maybe having a little foresight, like,
also,
and especially since
make a
since it's happened
deal.
before.
Make a deal with some other state to help you out if it comes to, I mean, like figure out a plan that is
Totally.
feasible, that if there's a huge crisis like this, you can call upon to be like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we could still get food to people.
Yep.
Like it would be one thing if like no one had invented a system for transporting food in icy weather.
I know.
But
Right.
that is what most of the country is doing in the winter. It's like most of America is transporting food on icy, snowy roads all winter when there is a huge snowstorm in New York State, in Massachusetts, in Illinois, in any of the winter states. You don't find like people go and buy food because you can't go out that easily in a snowstorm, but you
Right.
don't find that the food chain breaks down.
No.
What you find is that people get too excited about buying treats for themselves
Staples,
right before,
right?
yeah, like right before the snowstorm.
Like the milk will be out at the
Right,
store.
right. People buy a lot of eggs for some reason in these kinds of crises, but like you're not going to be like literally without food. Like the grocery store doesn't get picked clean.
Right.
In any case, there's going to be an additional layer to this, which is that because so many people had burst pipes, and also there were so many ridiculous mixed messages going on. Where like literally, there's a city in Texas that tweeted, "We've been advising people to drip their faucets to prevent pipes from freezing. However, due to low water pressure and supply concerns, we are asking citizens to refrain from doing this as much as possible." What? So like people dripped their pipes, and then first of all, no one knew how to drip their pipes properly because it was Texas and they'd never done this before. And so a lot of them were just running their water and then it would freeze and then their sink would overflow because the pipes would freeze. And that was its own chaos. Pipes were bursting all over the state. No one knew how to turn off their water because if you live in Texas, this has never come up for you.
Right.
You've never had to go and figure out how to turn off the water to your house.
Yeah.
And like, like usually on northeastern and midwestern big storm times, if it's like going to be so bad that your pipes are like legit definitely going to freeze and dripping your faucets will not be enough, you turn off your water and empty your pipes so that they're empty. And then you live your life without water briefly while you think about how your pipes are going to be so great when it finally unfreezes. But like no one knew how to do that in Texas.
Yeah.
And people were having to literally like construct heaters out of like candles and pots and stuff.
Yeah.
And like also, then people who kept their power saw their power bill go up to outrageous extremes. People were ending up with like $16,000 power bills because the demand skyrocketed. That wasn't their fault that the demand skyrocketed. It was the fault of the power company that didn't have enough power.
Yep.
But one thing about deregulating your energy and utilities industries is that is what happens when they provide shitty service. They can then hike your rates.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think there have been some leaks from like the local like natural gas companies and things like that, talking about like how great of a boon this was going to be for them.
Yeah.
Which is not surprising that,
No, but that is why
capitalism.
you regulate these industries.
Yeah.
You regulate things that, offer that are critical to basic public health. In any case, Biden signed a major disaster declaration on Friday because unlike Trump, he's only sometimes a monster. Greg Abbott is been trying to blame everyone but himself, but some might argue that he could also blame himself, and some also like arrest Rick Perry. This was
truly
so bad. Like, just put the man in jail. This is like like this was to cause a humanitarian crisis via bad policy is like literally what makes you like the domestic version of like a war criminal. Like
totally,
it's like a non-war war criminal. These are like, you know, their own version of seditious acts. Like to undermine a public utility that should be in the purview of the government to the extent that like people literally like die, like go to jail. In any case, also Greg Abbott did not once call the governor of Houston, I mean the mayor of Houston, the largest city.
Isn't that crazy?
During all of this, Houston, a city just filled with people, all of them heat, like just like the mayor of Houston was on MSNBC and was like, I spoke to the White House the entire time, but I never heard from Greg Abbott.
Yeah.
You guys don't elect Republicans, because what they will do instead of helping you get your water back and your heat back is they will group chat their friends and be like, it's kind of cold here. What if we all went to Cancun? And then when they are caught, they will be like, oh no, my daughters had a pre-existing obligation in Cancun and therefore we had to go. And then they will lie about their planned return date. Then because they are so hated, someone will sell them out at the ticket counter and tell everyone that they were lying about their planned return date. Then your wife's friends will sell you out because their group chat is going to be leaked to the New York Times. And that is what it is to be Ted Cruz.
Every part of this story was just peak Ted Cruz, because of course he tried to leave. Like, nothing about that is shocking. Actually, nothing about any of the story is shocking, but it's still delightful in every possible way, because like, it's not hard to imagine Ted Cruz fleeing Texas in the middle of all this, because he's like one of the worst people on earth. But the better parts of this story were obviously the ones that you just mentioned, where he threw his family under the bus.
Like, and then got sold out by everyone.
Right? Right? Yeah. I mean, this is a man who's been kissing Donald Trump's ass for the last 5 years, who notably called his wife ugly.
That's right.
You know, and so he throws them under the bus and then tries to claim that he's literally coming back the next day, that he was just like taking like a 24-hour trip to go to Cancun, right?
In the middle of a huge crisis.
He was gonna be there until Saturday, which we found out from whoever threw him under the bus there. And then
the ticket agent,
hilarious leak to the New York Times with his wife's group chat, where she specifically says, please don't leak this group chat to the New York Times.
Nobody likes Ted Cruz, including
I was going to say, do they have friends? I know they were supposedly going with friends, but like,
no, they have business acquaintances who do not care about whether or not they want to wind up in the New York Times. This is as if it was like, you know, noon on 9/11, and he was like, let's just go and get out of New York, and then tried to lie and say, no, I was always planning to come back on 9/12, but I just like couldn't get out of this pre-existing obligation to go to Cancun. And then actually booking a ticket after making that comment to the press, a verifiable fact, because you're booking them with a company that also probably wants to see you burn too. So it was like some person at like Delta or something that confirmed that he had bought the ticket at 6 a.m. that morning. Yeah. We should also note in the continuing story of Ted Cruz that he left his dog.
That's what I was about to get to. Okay, great.
Okay,
go ahead.
He left his dog in Texas to freeze to death, basically, in his unheated home.
Right.
Guess what
it didn't. We don't think.
No, right. Guess what his dog's name is, though? It's Snowflake.
Why?
What? How did this happen?
It's so weird, because he uses it. Who came up with that? Because like, he uses Snowflake as an insult, right? Like, I mean, that's how they came up with this name, obviously, right? Is because like, that's a thing that he's calling people all the time. But like, why would you name your dog that?
It doesn't. And I mean, it led to a lot of people making the same joke on the internet, which is a fair joke, which is, so I see he's named after his father, the dog Snowflake. But it's just like,
not Ted Cruz's father, who's the Zodiac killer.
That's right. Yeah, no, Snowflake is named after Ted Cruz, who is
Ted
the
Cruz
epitome of a
himself, who is
snowflake,
the
a
father,
person
right?
who
Yeah.
couldn't handle some sub-zero temperatures, unlike the rest of Texas, and then had to fly to Cancun to get out of the cold.
Yeah.
What was he going to do
Meanwhile,
in
right.
Texas, Brent? What could he have possibly done to help?
Well, he could have given out, food and supplies, and he could have maybe raised at least $3 million as the senator from that state, which is what Bronx Congresswoman AOC somehow managed to do.
That's right. Also, it feels like listen, AOC is a rock star. You all know how much we love AOC. It feels like we could be asking all of America to pay into a big pot that could then get distributed for just such a crisis, so that we wouldn't have to donate every single time a huge but foreseeable crisis occurs in another state.
What an interesting proposition that is.
I have an idea of where that pot could come from.
Yeah.
Is it
Tell me.
our weapons of war pot? Could we repurpose that to be a pot so that people in New York and other states that were where the Texas senator tried to deny disaster relief in past crises did not have to donate their personal money to the people of Texas, and Texans did not have to rely on the goodwill of the rest of America, but could instead be assured that they would be taken care of because of the trillions of dollars that are available in the United States for just such a situation.
Yeah, I like it.
An idea I have. We could call it taxes, but we could also call it fun money if we wanted to. I mean, call it whatever you want.
Sure.
It just feels like every single time this happens, we have to raise money. And I know that people like to help, and that's often the only thing you can do as a person who's not nearby to help.
Right.
But it also feels like this should not rest on individual generosity and charity, considering that these are American citizens in a part of America, and that maybe we could just be paying taxes so that people are taken care of in every circumstance, including emergencies.
I do think the perception on that is changing, though, honestly, because I think that a lot of people were having that conversation, and I feel like a lot of people have been having that conversation sort of around healthcare lately. Like, why is everybody having to have a GoFundMe page to do it? This very much felt in the same sort of world as that, obviously, and this specifically affected like a broad group of people. I'm not saying healthcare doesn't, but a specific a specific GoFundMe page for like one person. I mean, this is different. So you like really do need to do something for the entire state. But like, it really, I think, leads to the conversations of like, why am I donating somewhere? Will I? Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's the world in which we live. But does it have to be?
Yeah, and I would say that the one limitation on this system is Ted Cruz himself, because he is somebody who does not believe in that system unless it benefits his state. And this is, and the way that he has talked about other people's horrible disasters and lives being ruined in the past has been rude and dismissive. And he is the devil incarnate, and his beard is stupid.
Yep.
And these are all reasons that you shouldn't elect him to do anything ever again. And maybe should kick him out early from the seat that he's in, because I think his ideology is not based on reality if he cannot see the difference between, between his ideology and what his state's actual needs are.
Yeah.
And I just want, as a refresher, this is the same Ted Cruz who helped incite an armed white supremacist insurrection at the Capitol over a month ago.
Yeah.
It's not
so
a
we have a
different
few things that would be good reasons to get rid of Ted Cruz.
It's
right
the same
now.
one. So all the Ted Cruz's...
It's not one single thing that Ted Cruz has done, like going to Cancun recently. It's the entirety of it's the all-encompassing
Ted Cruz experience. Yeah. I know that seems like it could be a kind of popular name. I just wanted to clarify that we are talking about the same Ted Cruz here. It's one guy.
Yeah.
White supremacist armed insurrection, going to Cancun while his state is in crisis. Doesn't have any friends, apparently. Named his dog Snowflake. All of the dumb beard. All of this is the same Ted Cruz.
Same person. Yeah. Moving on from Texas, and maybe my favorite story of this week, Joe Manchin really single-handedly proved the broken clock theory to be true this week. Because Joe Manchin is somebody I hate more than most. Let's be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. This is a man, especially in a 50-50 Senate, who thinks he has more power than he does. And clearly, by doing what he did this week, he intends to yield it. And I would say 99.9% of the time, he is going to wield that power not for good.
That's right.
Right?
He's going to do it wrong.
But here we are, and it's only February, and he's wielding it for good, which was a real head-scratching moment for a lot of people on the left, because he announced on Friday that he is going to vote no on Neera Tanden for the office of management and budget, which, what a world. And his reasonings are crazy, because he's just mad at her mean tweets.
That's right.
Right? In a world where we just had Donald Trump as the president, we now can't have Neera Tanden as the head of OMB because she was mean to people on Twitter.
Specifically he's mad about her mean tweets towards Sanders, which everyone on earth is, but also towards Mitch McConnell, who is a person who is himself a mean tweet. So it's like his criteria is wacky.
Right. And if you're wondering why, am I mad at her because of her tweets at Sanders? I mean, sure. She was also very mean to Sanders supporters throughout the entire 2016 process, less so in 2020. But I mean,
we're also a hardy bunch, though.
Still was. But I'm also mad that she said that she wanted to fucking go to war with Libya so she could steal their oil. I mean, that's who we're talking about here. That's right. Like, this woman should be nowhere near anywhere in the cabinet. It doesn't matter. She's a terrible choice. She always was, and they always knew to a degree. I mean, they're not surprised by this, really. They're not pulling her yet because I think they think that they can maybe pull a Republican, and they probably can because she probably agrees with Mitt Romney more than she does with Bernie Sanders. So maybe they'll get 50 votes. I don't know.
I was going to say that the real head-scratching aspect of this for me was that we sort of hate Joe Manchin and Neera Tanden for similar reasons. Right. Where they're both sort of like corporate-owned goons who believe in moderate to no meaningful action on anything except for potentially going to war for unnecessary reasons. Like Neera Tanden, as a big Hillary Clinton fan, would love war more than anyone on earth.
Obviously.
Because that Clintonites
from the best.
Couldn't love war more than, they do. But like the reasons that we hate both of them are quite similar. And are also similar to the reasons that we dislike a Mitt Romney kind of figure. So I'm just like curious how everyone's making their choices right now.
I know. Like what I think makes me happy about this is that it was Joe Manchin. Like had Bernie Sanders said that he was going to vote no on her, I would have been like, good, Bernie with some balls on this one, right? He is still sort of like being evasive about it. I think it'll be interesting to see I think it'll be interesting to see if one Republican says that they are going to vote for her, then what he does. I think probably he is like enjoying the fact that Joe Manchin is the one who has harpooned this, and let me get back to my reason for enjoying that myself, because, Neera Tanden has spent so much of the last 5 or 6 years making it her main goal to just eviscerate the left, and not just eviscerate them, but like really be a terrible, nasty person, not just to Bernie Sanders themselves, but to people who thought maybe that we could have Bernie Sanders or wanted something better than Joe Biden, for God's sake. I mean, sue us, right? And so the fact that she's spent so much time doing that, to be then, have her comeuppance from a person who she probably felt was fairly friendly to her, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
she's never said anything mean about Joe Manchin.
No, is just so beautiful to me. It makes me so happy that it was Joe Manchin, of all people, who for the next 4 years will probably shoot down more good legislation than you can possibly even imagine. Right. But I mean, on this one, God bless him. I don't know what else to say.
A thought about this, because I've been thinking, like, why Joe Manchin? Why now? He's been a good soldier so far. He voted to convict Trump. He's voted for every other Biden nominee. Like normally, like Joe Manchin has the potential to have already been a bigger pain in the ass than he's been. And this is his first big stand against the administration. And to pick Neera Tanden as that stand is just wild to me. But I was thinking about who his electorate is actually made up of, and like who actually lives in West Virginia. And it is not corporate, Dem moderates. It is Trumpers and it's union people. So it's the far left and the far right and no one in between. And I think if there's one thing that the far left and far right can really agree on, it's that we both hate Neera Tanden, maybe for different
Yes,
reasons. But if there's something that me and a Trumper could really get on board with together, it would be not
totally.
wanting Neera Tanden to be in this administration.
Yep.
And so Joe Manchin seems like he's very moderate because he's often trying to find the middle ground between Trumpism and
Right.
like, you know, far left, like radical union
Yeah.
activism. And well, I don't know, calling it radical is crazy, but you know what I mean? Like for the US,
Yes, I
radical.
do.
Like union activism
Yeah.
shouldn't be radical, but it is here.
No.
So sue me. But I feel like what he's actually found here is the perfect combination of a cause that no one in the middle is interested in at all, that only his electorate cares about, but his whole electorate cares about it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I think Joe Manchin would like to, at least being from West Virginia, sort of like fancy himself sort of like a champion of blue collar people. Yes. I would say that he is almost literally the exact opposite of that. Correct. But like, I know that he thinks that that's who he is. And I know that he thinks
it's an image he has
that that's what he stands for. And if there is any person in the entirety of the Joe Biden cabinet level positions that need approved by the Senate, that is not that.
That's right.
It's Neera Tanden.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just sort of like, oh, this is like a wild moment to be Joe Manchin, because he had to make this really radical choice because his electorate is like only different kinds of radicalism.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting sort of, point.
I feel like I'm going to be thinking more critically about where Joe Manchin could be moved versus not in the future, having thought this to myself finally. Because I think that we often think that Joe Manchin, because he's so conservative as a Democrat, we think of him as sort of aggressively centrist. And I don't actually think that's what his deal is. He's wacky.
It shouldn't be. If it is his deal, then he's reading the room wrong.
Exactly. Because his electorate could push him to be different than he is being. There are issues that the far right and far left could coordinate on that are more about kind of, you know, one issue that I think is often misconstrued on the far right, but is a real concern of people on the far right, is corruption issues. You know, I know that's crazy. I know, but like, I know that they are not acting like they care about corruption issues, but that is one of the main issues that drives people into the Trump movement, is their hatred of the quote unquote swamp. It is about, you know, nepotism and corruption. And I can hear you all screaming at me that Trump was all of those things. And I couldn't agree more. But that is a place where far right wing, you know, idiots that are voting specifically against not their own interests even, but just like the interests of living people, could, I think, be moved. And I think that someone like Joe Manchin could actually be forced to move with them on that issue, because his electorate is not aggressively centrist. It is just wackily extreme on both sides.
And I also think that if he thinks that he is sort of like doing the work of the blue collar worker or just the workers in general, I think that you could also move him on some of these things that he claims to not necessarily be in favor of a lot of times. But I mean, like, you know, we're about to do a story on the $15 minimum wage. And I can't possibly imagine that there is a state in the union that would benefit more from a $15 minimum wage than West Virginia was. And I think that if faced with some good reasons why that might be the case, then I think that he could be moved. And I think the person who could give him those reasons is potentially the president. And it's disappointing to have learned this week that the president maybe doesn't so much fucking care.
Another person who claims to be a big blue collar guy, by the way.
Right.
If you have any politician that is claiming to you that they are representing blue collar America, is almost definitely in the pocket of like Wall Street and huge corporations. The politicians that are representing blue collar America meaningfully are politicians that are being framed to you as radical socialists right now. Like, if you live in blue collar America, you probably have a job where you have a boss, and that boss is like exploiting you, probably because that's what bosses do. Then you are maybe accidentally going to need to be a socialist. And I'm sorry about that.
You're going to need a union.
You don't own the means of production, so you need a union. Like, these politicians that frame themselves as like blue collar, everyday, you know, Joe, like almost to the T, are like enacting the opposite of what is in the interest of blue collar Americans and are using their credibility with blue collar America to sell that as a centrist idea that blue collar Americans can get behind. Blue collar Americans want a fucking $15 an hour minimum wage because there is no blue collar America anymore. There is just really impoverished poor America and really rich America. And the blue collar people that you're talking about are seeing their wealth disappear over time. They're seeing their parents having made much more money than they will ever make in their lifetime. They're seeing their benefits disappear. They're seeing their job security disappear. They're seeing everything that you claim is a bedrock of blue collar America disappear in front of them. And one way to bring it back is to ensure a living wage for them.
Yeah.
And now my rant's over. It's not over, but it'll come back later.
No, it's not, because it's going to pick up again probably in about 60 seconds. Because we're talking about the minimum wage, and we're going to keep talking about it because Joe Biden this week met with some mayors and governors, and he apparently bluntly told them to get ready for a defeat on the $15 minimum wage, which was unlikely to be included in this package that it's going to get passed through reconciliation for the COVID relief. So, and he's been hinting at this for quite some time, actually. Like, he kind of hinted at it in that interview that he did on CBS prior to the Super Bowl. And like, also, you know, he's talking a lot about like the Senate parliamentarian isn't going to let this be passed through reconciliation. But like, meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is out there being like, we're talking to the parliamentarian. We are talking to lawyers. We think that we can do this. So like, Biden is just using that as his out, but it's not even an official out yet. Because
I can tell you what happened. He didn't believe in the $15 an hour minimum wage. He adapted it into his platform, or adopted it into his platform, kind of adapted it into his platform too, because he had to, because it's wildly popular with his base. He had no choice but to support a $15 an hour minimum wage. Remember 2013 or whatever it was, when we were already trying to make sure that Hillary Clinton didn't run for president, or 2012, I can't remember what it was. 2013, we wrote our Hillary Clinton.
2013. It was right after the 2012.
It was right after the 2012 election. We wrote our Hillary Clinton piece being like, A, don't run, but B, in a later piece, I think we added, like, if you are going to claim that a $15 is unfeasible, so you can only support 12, just like get your life right and support 22. Like, don't.
Which is what it should be.
Which is what it should be. Don't, if it's not feasible at 12 or 15. So go big. Like, I think the problem that we have with these people, and the problem that we had with her, is that they don't want to raise the minimum wage because they are always looking for a reason why it's not feasible. Her, her reason why she couldn't support $15 an hour was that it wasn't feasible, but somehow 12 seemed feasible to her, but not really that. She was not that like excited about it. Like, Joe Biden hesitantly adopted the $15 an hour minimum wage into his platform because he had to, because it's wildly popular with his base. And now his job is going to be what her job was going to be about $15 an hour minimum wage, which is to tell us it's not feasible, so he can't do it. Right. It's only, you know what it takes to make something feasible is people doing it.
Well, and that is, I think, the thing that like is the most upsetting thing about this to me, the more I think about it, because like, I'm not fully shocked by this, and neither should you, because like, obviously this is not something that was like ever important to him anyway, even though, you know, it's now part of his platform. But the thing that makes me so angry is just that he has like completely given up on it, and also that he's not using, you know, he could push people on this. You know, it's so funny. On this call was Larry Hogan, who was like one of 4 Republicans who were on this meeting, and he stressed to Biden and the rest of the group that he didn't think raising the minimum wage was directly related to the immediate problems caused by the pandemic, and it's being looped in or packaged together with the COVID bill. And apparently the reports were that Biden didn't push back on Hogan at the time, and nor was there any protracted conversation about it. They just sort of like simply moved on. And it is his job to, like, the fact that he didn't take 30 seconds, less than 30 seconds, 7 seconds to explain to Larry Hogan why people having a living wage in the middle of a fucking pandemic was important is some serious bullshit from the president of the United States, who supposedly stands for this and is, you know, quote unquote, attempting to get this passed. And, you know, he could explain, he could push the parliamentarian, he could push Joe Manchin or whatever Democrat might be having issues on this. Although I don't even think we've heard from Manchin that he wouldn't vote on that yet. We've heard very little from Manchin about what he will and won't vote for.
We heard from Sinema, but Sinema has a history of supporting it, so she's in some hot water about it. So she could be pushed.
Right. So I just, if he wanted this in there and he thought that the parliamentarian would allow it, he could make it happen. He could
Yeah.
knock some heads. He could threaten some lives. He could, if he cared. So what he's proving right now is that he just doesn't actually care. So if somebody tries to tell you that he cares and it's just not feasible, you tell them that that is inaccurate. He
Yeah.
does not care. He doesn't
Yeah,
care whether you get paid $15 an hour.
he's not going to try. This is
No,
a
he already
whole
gave up.
conversation about how he's not planning to try.
Yeah.
And
And he knows
I
that if they don't get it passed through reconciliation, it's never going to pass, right? Like this is not a thing that so he knows that if this doesn't pass now, it's dead, right?
Yeah.
There's not 60 votes for this.
Yeah. No, and I feel like this everything that he does adds to the perception that he campaigned on lies and you can't trust politicians and no one ever delivers on anything. And I don't
Totally.
think that we were
Well, the
in a
whole
position
COVID
where we
package
could
is that right now. I mean, the fact that nobody
exactly
has any additional money in their checking account right now, I think is making a good chunk
like
of the country
this
question
is
whether he's,
a
should have
way
been
to
elected in
make
the first place.
democratic leadership look ineffective. And
Yeah.
if you lose, you lose. If you don't get the $15 passed, you don't get it passed. But I think that it is worth looking, at least in the media, like you tried a little, then it like just so that it looks like you will go to the mat for people.
Right.
This isn't the reason that people care so much about this issue is because this is an issue that disproportionately affects all of the people who need help the most at
Right.
once.
Well,
It
and that,
disproportionately affects women. It disproportionately affects people of color. It disproportionately affects low-wage earners. It disproportionately affects the people with the fewest job protections and the least help that,
right.
in all of society. It disproportionately impacts everyone who needs the help the most at once
Right.
in
That's what I
one,
just want. I just want to hear that from him. Like
yes,
maybe the parliamentarian ultimately will say, no, you can't pass this here. But if the headline from this particular
yes,
article was Joe Biden admits $15 won't pass through uh, uh, um, budget
reconciliation.
process reconciliation, but gives impassioned plea to Larry Hogan as to why it's important, then we wouldn't be talking about the story at all right now, because we would have been like, okay, well, like moving on with our
He
lives,
tried.
at least
Yeah.
Joe Biden cares, but like it's not going to work in Congress. So like we can't do it. Like it
Yeah.
sucks. That's the world in which we live.
No,
But
it's like
like that's not the story. The headline
trying
was he didn't give a shit.
he's not even trying to look like he's fighting for us. And I don't know why people would go to the polls in 2 years for Democrats if Democrats don't try to help you.
Yeah.
They campaign on lies, and then you get told drain the swamp, and you're like, yeah, we should drain the swamp because this is why people hate the swamp.
It is. Yes.
For some reason, they don't seem that bothered by like overt displays of corruption and nepotism, but they
Yeah.
really hate when you promise them something and they don't get it. Donald
Yep.
Trump sort of innately understood that, I think, about the process because he did like the few effective things that he did, and I don't mean effective in that they were good, but effective in that he got them done, were like he was, he got what he could say was a tax cut through. And come hell or high water, they'll never be able to take that tax cut away from him, or apparently from any of us, because they just continue to let us have these dumb tax cuts that don't help anyone except really rich people. But whatever.
Right.
But like he got us those $1,200 checks, and he made sure that his name was on them. He was
Yeah.
able to take credit for the things that he claimed. He issued crudely worded, stupid press releases claiming he had drained the swamp by firing some dumb bureaucrat that no one cared about, and people like it made it seem like he was doing something. Like
Right.
these kinds of moves are stupid, yes, but they are actually necessary to look like you're effectively governing if you want to look like a change in leadership resulted in anything.
Yeah.
And instead, people are just as desperate, and they have a president telling them they can't have anything,
Yeah.
which is like we're like the hall monitors of political parties. We just sort of like tell people what they can't do.
Yeah.
Another time that he did that this week was at the CNN town hall, which was there specifically for him to sell us all on the idea of COVID relief, or the COVID relief package he's proffering.
Yeah.
But at the town hall, a woman asked him, we need student debt loan forgiveness beyond the $10,000. We need at least $50,000. What will you do to make that happen? And he answered, I will not make that happen. And then he went on to say, and this is where my mind exploded and I fell onto the floor and collapsed into a heap of annoyed sobbing, was that he didn't it didn't make sense to forgive the student debt for, quote, people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn. To that, I have a hearty message for him, which is fuck you, because that is not who is in debt right now because of school. No. There is this myth that people who are in huge amounts of student debt get the benefit of some like prestigious education always. And that, you know, because of that, it's like all these really privileged people who are like siphoning government money off because they're all Harvard lawyers.
Right.
The people with the most unmanageable debt are vastly disproportionately more likely to be people of color. They are vastly disproportionately more likely to be people who went to public universities and shitty, predatory for-profit schools. The Ivies only, of the entire pantheon of federal student borrowers, only 0.3% went to Ivy League schools. A lot of Ivy League schools, in fact, offer financial aid packages that are no loan packages. So people don't graduate with debt there as frequently as they do at other schools. 12% of student loan borrowers total went to selective colleges and universities. So only 12% of borrowers are going to fancy schools. Only a quarter of them are going to private nonprofit colleges at all. 49% came from public colleges. 49% of America's student debt holders are from public colleges, and many of them are in much more than $10,000 of debt. Another 25% went to predatory for-profit schools, and half of those are likely to default on their debt. That's half of for-profit schools graduates end up defaulting on their debt. So that is 12.5% of federal borrowers are people who are going to default on their debt after getting a worthless education. This is an issue, like I said, it disproportionately impacts low-income people, Black and brown people. Like, don't moralize to us about the fucking Ivies when what you are talking about is a policy that will offer disproportionate benefits, again, to the people who actually need the help the most, the people who got the least to show from their education. They did not get fancy, educations where they get to be like lawyers at white shoe firms out of going to fucking Trump University. Or like Full Sail University or whatever. And I don't also feel like using the Ivies as a scare tactic to not offer assistance on an issue that would have huge public benefits to all of us, because young people being out of debt, and especially educated young people being out of debt, offers a huge public benefit because it allows young people to go into fields where they can actually be of fucking use and not just go work at, giant white shoe firms if they need to, or to go work at other high paying jobs. They can, when you think about why it's so hard to retain teachers these days, when you think, there's a lot of issues with that because they're also not being paid enough. But some of the reasons that people don't go into public good careers is because they can't afford to, because they're in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. So erase their debt. But also, first of all, this is related to that Pete Buttigieg talking point that I hate, where he goes on and on about how we can't give everyone free college because we don't want to pay for the college educations of billionaires. And to which I say, public education is a public good. It actually benefits all of us to educate everyone. The reason that we don't means test for second grade is because we have realized that it is beneficial to all of us that everyone have an education. And that should extend into the public universities as well. And to use the talking point that we don't want to give billionaires some special benefit, I would remind you that they too pay taxes. They should pay more in taxes. They should pay their fair share in taxes. And if they were, then they would actually be paying more towards those educations than the rest of us. So
But I think it's
not a valid talking point. It's a scare tactic.
It is, and that's all also tied in with your whole point about the amount of people who have Ivy loans, because also people who
are like a rich person problem.
I was going to say people who are billionaires are also not going to state schools, which is why they don't have any. Which is why they don't have any. So we're not actually paying if we're only paying for free public colleges and universities, then we're not paying for billionaires to go to school anyway, because they're not going to those schools in most instances anyway. That's not to say,
and if they do, great.
But if they do, fine.
It's like
it's free; they can use it. But they're going to still go to Harvard.
But also, that talking point irks me because it uses logic that only ends up benefiting the very wealthy, who are never in any danger of losing access to debt-free education. Using means testing. I know I've explained this on the podcast before, so I'm just talking again about an issue that I just annoys
Do it.
me because it's a talking point that Democrats use that is a Republican talking point. But
Yeah.
when you start means testing education, you make it so much easier to eliminate access for the bottom or middle than you do at the top. The top never loses access to anything. So don't
Yep.
ever worry about what they're up to. But when you start saying it is, that people have to pay something towards their education, then what you end up doing is making it harder for everyone else on the spectrum to get an education. It doesn't actually benefit or not benefit the people on the top. They have their own special privilege that they get where nothing ever seems to touch them. So don't worry about them. But this is the same thing. Framing this issue as an issue that is about rich people when it is an issue about poor people makes it so that people have a hard time empathizing with the problem. Joe Biden here, sounds like your shitty boomer uncle who like rattles off conspiracy theories to you from Fox News at dinner. This is something that boomers inherently misunderstand about the millennial and Gen Z experience. We are in massive amounts of debt. They were not in massive amounts of debt.
No, they didn't have to pay that much to go to college.
They didn't have to pay this much to go to college. It creates a huge burden on our futures. And I say this as someone who went to college debt free. I mean, I got that privilege, and I'm here to tell you that it changed my life, because I was able to literally go and try anything when I graduated from college. I was able to make mistakes without it ruining my life. I was able to do all of that. I was able to make very little money and keep a roof over my head because I didn't have this weird thing draining out of my income. I mean, it changes your life to get a free education in the best possible way. So like,
I was in my mid-30s when I paid off my student loan, and I went to the University of Iowa. I went to state school. So
he was one of the 49%.
Yeah, it would be. Yes.
Like, I just like the idea that Biden's famous empathy does not extend to people in the situations of most millennials, and that somehow like he can't see that an issue like this that is a structural problem is more tragic than just the shitty luck of having someone in your family die of cancer, because it ruins millions of lives instead of just one. Like, he's somebody who is there. Everyone's always going on about how much empathy he has and how nice he is. And he'll remember the uncle that died of cancer 20 years ago in your family. And he'll remember your brother's name and your mom's name. And he'll ask you how they're doing and whatever. And that's great. He's a politician. That's what politicians are good at. But he seems to lack empathy for the victims of structural problems again and again. That's the same case with the minimum wage situation. It's, he seems to be somebody who can only have empathy for a situation that he can't do anything about, instead of empathy for you in a situation where he could actually be empowered to help you.
Right. He's the president, guys.
He's literally the president. He has been in the Senate since before I was born, basically. He was elected to the Senate the year after I was born, I believe. My lifespan is his career span in the Senate. He is somebody who has always been in a position where he could contribute to helping solve structural problems for you. And he has again and again abdicated that responsibility and been really good at remembering your uncle's brother's cousin's name. And I get that probably makes him a nice person to like meet in a crowd and make you feel special. But if he cannot find empathy for the millions of millennials whose lives are like fucking shitty because they're in tens of thousands of dollars of debt that was not properly explained to them, and they were not given career opportunities that allowed them to pay it off, and also they're never have to pay off this kind of debt, then he does not have empathy. He's not as empathetic as we're always talking about.
Right. And by the way, many of those millennials entered the job market when there weren't even freaking jobs anyway. So like, that's partly why they have so much debt right now, is because they spent years and years and years not even having a job where they could make a fucking payment.
Yeah. Like, I don't know how he can't see it.
Yeah.
I do know. And that's the problem with having what's the word, gerontocracy, when everyone is super old. He's as judgmental towards millennials as your like shitty boomer uncle is.
Yeah, no,
and
totally. He
is
is
somebody who has millennials in his family. Like, I don't understand. Like, my parents are also boomers, but they are not this shitty to millennials because they have a millennial, so they know what millennials deal with. Like, you know how like Republicans don't like gay people until they have like a Republican son?
Yeah.
Why doesn't it work that way generationally?
Until they have a gay son.
I mean, sorry. But like, why doesn't it work that way generationally? Like, why can't Biden, who has millennials in his family, see what he can't see?
Yeah.
It doesn't see.
I don't know, man.
It's infuriating. It's infuriating only because he's constantly talked about as so empathetic. And I hate when politicians who are not helping people in terrible situations are called empathetic because they like will remember your uncle's name.
Yep.
Like that's just a skill. That's not empathy.
Yeah. Oh
In any
man,
case,
Joe.
I just get worked up about Democrats using Republican talking points to justify not helping people get educations. Educations are so great.
Or education or healthcare, or they do it all the time.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
Just like, what a time.
Boy.
In any case.
Anyway, Donald Trump is going to be back in our lives for a minute next weekend, which is
been given a platform.
Disappointing, but not shocking.
At least he won't be able to be on Twitter while he's at CPAC.
That's very true. And this story has like reminded me of something that I want to say because he's going to be speaking at CPAC next week. Mike Pence declined, probably because many of the people who are speaking at CPAC probably were in favor of him being hung on the Senate floor.
Okay.
Less than 2 months ago. So, maybe you don't want to go there, and maybe we should cut Mike Pence some slack for maybe not wanting to like go to Orlando for that event. But, there has been so much reporting, and it's in this article that we pulled this info from, which is from CNN, and like CNN has been doing, all of these news outlets are doing it, where they are just talking about how deeply Republicans are struggling with how to move on with their political lives from Donald Trump, and how like they just really are just having all of these thoughtful conversations about like what life after Trump is going to look like, and how they're going to elect more candidates who are sort of like more thoughtful people, and like not have like, no, they're not doing any of that. Fuck off, all of you news outlets. They are not doing that. Every single Republican in leadership has gone down to Mar-a-Lago in the last month and a half to kiss his ass, whether it's Kevin McCarthy or whether it's Lindsey Graham or whether it's, literally everybody has been down there. Those are just the two that I can think of. Every day you see a new report about somebody who's gone to go visit Trump to kiss the fucking ring. The only person who hasn't done it is Mitch McConnell, which is kind of weird, I'll be honest. But like the Republicans are not, and now they've invited him to speak at the Conservative Political Action Committee, which is like their main fucking event, right? For like the entire party. They are not struggling with this. They are not choosing to move on. This is the party of Trump. And if somebody wants to try and convince you otherwise, you should not let them do so. And I wish the news media would stop declaring about how thoughtful Republicans are in their, talking amongst themselves on how to move on, because they're not doing that.
No. Another thing that I'm mad at them about is that they're doing this thing, and I hate when they do it with Democrats, and I hate when they do it with Republicans, where they start taking polls about likely presidential candidates like 1 minute after the last election. And then it's always like, surprise, somebody who's really popular right now is the only candidate anyone likes. And it's like, well, they're also the only one that's just run a presidential campaign. So of course, is Donald Trump still the most popular pick for president among Republicans? Probably, because he just spent 2 years campaigning to them. But like, it is not those kinds of reports almost like make it so. They did with Clinton. We started here. The reason we wrote in 2013, Hillary Clinton, don't run for president, is because we were already hearing that they had cleared the field for her and there was no one else and it was all hers and she could just waltz in and take it. And we were like, this is not a helpful way to let voters make a decision about their priorities in 4 years. No. It's just sort of boxing them into like a thing that we already know didn't work because she lost once. Like, this is the same problem with Trump. You will make it so if you start reporting that he's the only politician in the entire Republican caucus who could possibly win the presidency. He's not. There are other evil people out there who want to be the president, who could be the Republican candidate for president. We haven't thought of them yet because we've been under the thrall of a wannabe dictator. Like, don't report on that story. That's not a story.
Yeah.
It's just a reality that you're turning into a problem for all of us.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a digression, but I just saw
Sorry, I got worked up there too, because
well, we had to.
I hate that messaging of
they're not thinking to themselves, you guys. They're just on to what they're up to.
They're on Team Trump. They always have been. They've been, carrying his water for the last 5 years. They're going to continue to do so. They have proven so by inviting him to speak at CPAC and everyone going down to visit with him. The people are, Mike Lee just had a freaking a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. So like, don't
imagine if
I
you're like a
can't.
person who's at a Mike Lee fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, like what your life is?
Oh God.
How
I mean, it's
much
tragic, but
gold is in your house if you are that
yeah.
like what on a scale of 1 to new money tacky, like what is your aesthetic? And how much
Yeah.
gold is on your person? But also like what is your IQ score? Because it would have to be low. So many questions.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
getting off track.
Yeah. That's fine. We're gonna
Good
move on.
news.
We're gonna move on to COVID.
That's right.
There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this week from this guy who's named Dr. Marty McCary. He is a surgeon and also a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And
Ugh,
he is
Bloomberg.
claiming that we're going to have herd immunity in the United States by April. Now, listen, I'm sure there have been public health experts who have written retorts to this article.
Yes,
I have not read them, and I don't want to read them
that's right.
because this is what I would like to believe. So we're going to tell you why he thinks that, and then we're just going to take that as fact because I would like to have herd immunity by, I would like, at the end
Tomorrow.
of April, I would like to have a 40th birthday party.
That's right. Yeah,
So Marty
Brent has a
McCary
party
is
need.
really speaking to my soul right now.
That's right. Brent has needs coming up in terms of party opportunities.
That's right. Yeah. But the numbers make sense to me in
A scientist.
a way that, like, I'm convinced. Let's just say that. I need no other information or facts. I read the bullet points from the op-ed. I didn't even read it because it was behind the Wall Street Journal paywall.
Fucking Wall Street Journal, by the way.
Everything's
them and
behind the
their
paywall.
fucking
You can't read anything from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
I mean, fuck them anyway. But
we'll tell you why. So something that I think most public health experts agree upon is that many more people than the official number, which is now at 28 million people, have COVID, and probably exponentially so because
or have
had it because we know how easily it how communicable
and also how
it
difficult it was to get tested during a lot of the heights of the crisis.
So much of it, right? So there are some estimates that up to 6 or 6.5 times more than that 28 million number have had it. That's would be 182 million people. We've also administered at least 61 million first doses of vaccines, right? And so now, if you take that 182 million people, which would be on the high end of how many people have maybe had it already, plus the 61 million, and you start adding up the numbers of how many vaccines we're doing per day, how many vaccines we're supposed to, we're probably have a third vaccine online before April, you're well over 50% of the country right now, already potentially, if you take the high end numbers here. So like, and there's
that's sort
also
of the
like
key though, is that you have to take the high end numbers to get there.
You have to take the high end numbers, right? Well, I'm taking
it's an
the high
optimistic
end
projection.
I'm taking them.
Right.
Yeah.
Brent's in California. He can afford to be optimistic.
There's also been, there's just in the last 6 weeks, there's been a 76% reduction. Now, that could also be because we were so high there for a minute, specifically around holiday travel. So, is the reason that it's going down right now because we've sort of settled back into what we were doing like before the holidays. We certainly haven't changed our behavior in any way that we weren't doing pre-holidays anyway. I mean, there was a lot of travel and that certainly like led to numbers, but like 76% is like quite high of a reduction that we have. And it's happening worldwide, I believe, too, actually. So I think a lot of people are sort of now wondering whether we're getting closer to the end of this than maybe we're being led to believe. But it also makes good sense that like if you're working at the CDC, you're not going to be like, we're almost there.
Right. Everyone stop being careful because we're right.
It makes more sense to them to message that, it's time to continue to wear your masks and get a vaccine if you're able to get one and social distance and do all of those things. So like, I get that they're not just going to shout from the rooftops that like April's the end game,
Certainly, I think there's probably reason to believe in certain pockets that, like in LA, given how out of control it got over the winter, holidays, there are
Yeah.
obviously many more cases, or were many more cases than were
Yeah.
recorded in LA.
Oh, for
And
sure.
so obviously there's like I think some estimates are that like a third of LA or more has had COVID. So if you
Oh,
could
yeah, that's
just
right. They were like saying like 1 in
get
3 people. Yeah, right. Yeah.
right. So if you could just get over that hump, you would at least have a little window. I think there's a few things we don't know. One is, can these variants that are coming that are more
Yep.
transmissible, does your immunity from one extend to the other?
Yep.
Because there are a few situations in which people have gotten COVID more than once. And so how closely related are these, and how closely related are the immune responses to them? And then also, like, will there be, as those new variants come, will there be sort of like another uptick where, like, from a public health perspective, what you're trying to do is keep hospital beds open. So like
Right. Exactly.
that's why like New York City has a ton of cases right now, and they're still opening indoor dining because the hospital
Yeah.
rates have gone down. So there's
Well, and that's
capacity,
what has happened here too, actually.
right? Which
Because
is
like when we
right.
were up over, we had like something like I think just shy of like 8,000 hospitalizations in LA County, and we're in the low 3,000s right now. And
Right. So
that's
they're
just
like
literally in the last 6 weeks. So that's
they're
why
in the
things are opening
risk
up.
reduction business, but that doesn't mean that there's not enough people that the pandemic could get out of control if a more transmissible variant comes and they haven't caught up with vaccines, because they are
Right,
behind
right.
on the vaccination front in LA.
I know. Well, and also like it's not shipping anywhere right now because of the
Right.
freaking weather.
No,
Um,
and I mean, and the criteria has been much stricter in LA than it's been anywhere else.
totally. Yeah.
It's like wild how many people I know in New York who are vaccinated already for
Oh yeah.
various reasons, because they're
New York, New
doctors or
Jersey.
whatever.
Yeah.
They, if they're in New Jersey, they just had to have a pre-existing condition. They're already
Yeah. I have friends
vaccinated.
in Iowa. Yeah.
Right. Like and in LA, I don't know anyone who's been vaccinated.
It's still only over 65.
And when they on March 1st, it's opening to a new group, but the criteria to meet the immunocompromised mark in LA is so much stricter than it is anywhere else too. Like you can't qualify with asthma there. You can't qualify with
But I
anything
think
that's
they
not
are
like
also
deadly.
to meet that marker, I think is up to um, Medicare or medical professionals. So yes, there is a specific list, but I think as soon as they say that it's immunocompromised and they're leaving it
Everyone's
up to
going to
like
be.
doctors to basically like allow someone to get it, I think it's going to be a free for all in March, even though I think they're trying to be clear about who can and can't get it. But like once it's no longer just an age, I think
Yeah.
it's
Well,
over.
especially because people are watching people in other states get them all over the place and are probably sitting around like, after we just went through this horrible time, like
Yeah.
when does it come to us?
Yeah.
So hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon.
But
In any
anyway,
case, sure, optimism. April,
optimism. Yes.
Brent's birthday party.
Birthday optimism.
We'll all be there in person. It'll be great. Um,
Yeah.
they did find this week that it seems like just one dose of the 2-dose vaccines is highly protective.
Well,
And
that's I think the other thing that led this
yeah,
person to believe that too, because like there's so many people who have been given first doses, and I think like, and
to wait
there
for
was some
second
discussion.
doses.
There was some high level discussion that they were talking about this week. That I think the CDC itself is sort of like trying to decide whether it now makes more sense to use all of those doses as first doses, because you would probably get to herd
I
immunity much quicker that way if it's working as well as it supposedly is working.
I mean, Britain made that gamble, and I think it's sort of been vindicated because that's what they're doing there. And they
Mm.
also found that it doesn't diminish the effectiveness of the second dose if you wait longer to give it.
Mm.
So I feel like I think more people with some immunity is better than some people with
I think
full
so too.
immunity.
Well, and the
Oh,
second dose is, I think most medical
I'm not a
professionals
scientist.
are agreeing that the second dose is too high anyway. And that's
Yeah,
why people are getting sick after the second dose,
yeah,
is because you
yeah,
don't
because it's
need
the
a
same as the
full
first dose.
second dose anyway. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I think that is probably the case.
yeah.
And also that would then free up even more of it, because then if
Yeah,
you
exactly.
could, use a little bit less for the second dose, it would
Yeah.
be it would create more vaccine just flowing around.
Yeah, exactly.
And they found that the Pfizer doesn't have to be stored as cold for as long as they thought. Like you
Oh, I
can,
hadn't heard that.
yeah, so you can store it now for about 2 weeks in a regular freezer,
Oh, nice.
which I think will help a lot as well.
Love it. Yep.
Before we head out, well, before we tell you about Joe Biden's dog.
A ridiculous story.
Just some updates on how Prop 22 is going for everyone. Remember when they blanketed you with advertisements telling you that they were going to hike your rates if they had to meet all of this, workers' protection criteria? And because of that, you were going to be putting people out of work and destroying the world if you voted for workers in gig work to have workplace protections. Well, here's the thing. Every single one of those services is raising their fucking rates anyway. They got what they wanted. They got an unregulated industry and they raised the rates anyway. Why? To pay for the $200 million advertising campaign that they had to launch in order to get themselves free of regulation. So you know what? Fuck them.
Yep. Yeah. Like, I mean, the CEO of Uber publicly said that prices were going to increase between 20 and 40% in big California cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles. And it was going to double in smaller towns. And like, even in the official voter guide, which came with the mail-in ballots, the supporters warned that there would be significantly higher consumer prices if Prop 22 failed to pass. Well, guess what? Every single one of these companies has raised the rates. And when I say every single one, I am meaning that literally, and I'm using literally correct. Right. They all have. Every single company that put into that $200 million to trick you into voting for this have gone up $1 to $2 per meal with Uber Eats, $1.50 with Grubhub, up to $1.50 per ride with Lyft, as much as $2.50 more per Postmates order. And just on Friday, Instacart announced that they're adding an additional 3% increase with every order for this. So, and besides you as the consumer getting screwed after you voted for this, I mean, hopefully nobody listening to this podcast voted for it because
then we really have to talk to you.
Their whole reasoning was that, this was going to be, remember all those commercials you saw where they were like, we're going to give our employees healthcare and we're going to let them we're going to pay them more and we're going to continue to let them like set all of their own schedules and all of that. Well, like The Guardian this week did a whole story on how the drivers are claiming that their pay has actually fallen and that the job has actually become much less reliable. Some of that is probably due to conditions right now because not as many people are going places and using their services. But like, regardless, basically every single thing that they told you
was a lie.
That was a lie. All of it. Anything that you saw on a commercial or in a mailer or whatever, the exact opposite has become true since this thing passed.
Here's a thing that we could all do, I think, to help. Put this on the ballot every single year so that they are forced to pay $200 million back to some other sector of the economy if this is how they're going to act.
Yeah.
Make them defend this every year because this is, I think, it's offensive for obvious reasons.
Oh, it totally is. Yeah.
And it's why you don't let corporations write their own laws. But I think that the additional insult of it being the most expensive prop ever because they blanketed us with these lies deserves some payback. I don't think they deserve to get away with this. First of all, if this comes to your state, tell them to fuck all the way off.
Yeah.
These companies are making a profit. Don't worry about them.
They're fine. Yeah.
They're doing fine. Second of all, they're going to raise your rates anyway. So don't engage. Yeah. Don't let them make rules. But also, like, Californians deserve to have another crack at this one.
Yeah. Yeah, they got duped.
They got duped in a really extreme way. And they no longer, they can continue to advertise lies to us, but we now have evidence of what will happen.
Yeah, we got proof. We know
when a policy like this happens.
We know. Yeah.
And this is just, it's too big a sector to allow this to be a forever change. We passed a workplace safety law specifically targeted at these workers because these companies are so exploitive. Don't let them write their own laws, you guys.
Yeah.
Tell them no. Make them defend it with $200 million in advertising every single time. Your rates are going to go up either way, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, also, it's going to be so annoying to have to boycott all these companies, and now we're going to have to. And I liked having Lyft and Uber available to me. But
I know, same.
I already, there were already some labor protection issues with them because of what they were doing to taxi industries, which had slightly, more protected workforces. I don't want to have to go back to a time where you can't get anywhere. and they know that about us. So
Yep.
we can't let them win.
I agree. What if we pull a David Hogg and start a progressive rideshare corporation?
I love this idea. I love it. The system's already worked out. We can just and we can say that what's the reason it's not steal.
Yeah, we don't have to design a pillow.
No, exactly. The reason that we're not stealing their idea is because we're doing it without the intention of exploiting everyone, and they're openly exploiting everyone. So that's our idea. Our idea is a rideshare company, but not exploitive. A rideshare company, but not run by assholes.
Yep.
In any case, I love it.
Oh man. In final news, hard-hitting news.
Oh yeah.
By the way,
what came from Newsmax?
Journalism at its finest here. Newsmax did a story about Joe Biden's dog.
Specifically, the fact that his dog is not like presidential enough. It's not fancy enough.
Yeah, they had a panel on. By the way, let's talk about this. But they said whoever was hosting it, who was it? Kelly? What was it? I can't remember. Greg Kelly, known idiot, Greg Kelly, says to the panel, he says, "Did you see the dog? I want to show you something I noticed." And then they show a photograph of the 12-year-old rescue dog, by the way, slightly graying, Champ, God bless him, in the Oval Office. And he said, "That dog needs a bath and a comb and all kinds of love and care. I don't understand how much love I don't know how much love and care he is getting. This dog looks like, I'm sorry, from the junkyard."
Yeah, and then so they had a panel on. One of the guests then says that Champ looks, quote, "very dirty and disheveled and very unlike a presidential dog." What does a presidential dog look like?
I know. But your president, Newsmax, the president that you favored, was too evil to even have a presidential dog.
Exactly. Like, is he supposed to wear a suit every day? Like, what makes your dog presidential enough?
Yeah.
He needs a bow tie? I just don't understand. I do, because it's Newsmax, but I love that they are so failing at grasping at even the straws of, Joe Biden's sort of scandal worthiness. Like,
I know.
Hit him because he's not delivering for his constituents. I don't fucking care about his dog, and nobody does. And you have nothing to say about him because he's not being corrupt the way that the last president was being corrupt, and he's also not being flashy the way the last president was being flashy, and he doesn't actually care about entertaining you. Wild times out here, you guys. All right, that's the news this week. Listen, hopefully there will not be a major crisis this week, but the State of the Union is on Tuesday, so I don't.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh God, I didn't know.
Yeah, so that is something we're all going to have to contend with. We'll probably be live tweeting it. It's going to be a whole situation.
Oh Lord.
I don't know how they do it COVID safe, because the best part of the State of the Union is all those people having to be in that room together. So I
know.
A lot of questions.
Yeah.
You can't have the SCOTUS judges in there. They're all like, well, now they're all young, I guess, so it'd be fine. They used to all be
and that they're that there's going to be people who are not going to want to wear masks in there.
I mean, that is going to be, how do you enforce that? And who are they going to point to and clap at if they can't have guests?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many questions.
So many.
So, we'll be here for that and for everything else, because we're just here all the time. And we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.